The stagecoach wheels ground to a halt with a finality that made Clara Bennett's stomach clench. Through the dust-caked window, she glimpsed the weathered sign, "Welcome to Copper Falls, population 312. Her gloved fingers instinctively rose to adjust the dark veil concealing her face, a habit formed through years of hiding from the world's cruel gaze. This was supposed to be her sanctuary, her second chance at life, where no one knew the story written across her scarred skin. The driver's gruff voice cut through her thoughts. "End of the line, miss. This here's Copper Falls." She heard him, spit tobacco juice into the dirt, the sound somehow ominous in the mountain air. Clara gathered her courage like armor, clutching the worn leather valise that contained everything she owned in this world. 3 months of correspondence had led to this moment. William Hartley's letters had painted a picture of a prosperous merchant seeking a refined Eastern bride, someone who could bring culture to this rough mining town. He'd never asked for a photograph. She'd never offered one. As her boots touched the dusty ground, Clara felt dozens of eyes upon her. Men paused mid-conversation outside the saloon. Women peered from behind calico curtains. Children pointed with the honest cruelty of youth. The dark veil she wore was unusual enough to draw attention, but she knew it was better than the alternative. Beneath the fine mesh, her fingers traced the raised patterns that marked her left cheek and jaw, souvenirs from the scarlet fever that had nearly claimed her life at 15. The disease had spared her life but stolen her beauty, or so she'd been told by every suitor who'd recoiled upon seeing her face back in Philadelphia. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The October wind carried the sharp tang of pine and the metallic scent of the nearby copper mines as Clara stood on the platform, searching the crowd for William Hartley. She'd memorized his description from his letters: tall, broad-shouldered, with sandy hair and a thick mustache. A successful man, he'd written, owner of the largest general store between here and Missoula, the kind of man who could overlook imperfections in exchange for companionship and domestic skills. Her search was interrupted by heavy footsteps on the wooden boardwalk. A man emerged from the gathered crowd, and Clara's heart lifted momentarily. He matched William's description perfectly. The height, the build, the mustache that dominated. His weathered face, but something in his eyes made her stomach turn cold. They swept over her veiled form with the calculating gaze of a man appraising merchandise. "Miss Bennett?" His voice was rougher than she'd imagined, lacking the refinement suggested in his carefully penned letters. "I'm William Hartley." Clara nodded, her throat suddenly dry. "Mr. Hartley, it's a pleasure to finally meet you." She extended her gloved hand, noting how his massive paw engulfed it entirely. His grip was firm to the point of discomfort. "Let's have a look at you then," William said bluntly, releasing her hand. The crowd pressed closer, sensing drama unfolding. "Take off! That veil! Want to see what I'm getting for my money?" The crude words struck Clara like a physical blow. This wasn't the gentle courtship she'd imagined, the gradual revelation she'd hoped for. "Perhaps somewhere more private?" she suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. William's laugh was harsh as the mountain wind. "Nothing private about a mail-order arrangement, miss. Whole town knows I sent for you. Now let's see that face." With trembling fingers, Clara reached for the pins securing her veil. She'd imagined this moment 1,000 times during the long journey west, had practiced the words she'd say to explain. But standing here in the dust of Copper Falls Main Street, surrounded by curious strangers, all her rehearsed speeches evaporated like morning mist. The veil lifted away, and she heard the collective intake of breath from the crowd. William's face transformed instantly, his expectant smile twisting into something ugly and dangerous. The scars on Clara's face seemed to pulse under his scrutiny. The puckered skin along her jaw, the web of marks that traced from her left ear to the corner of her mouth, the slight droop of her left eyelid that no amount of powder could disguise. What in the hell is this? William's voice boomed across the street, causing horses tied to the nearby post to shift nervously. This ain't what I paid for. He stepped back as if her condition might be contagious, his face reddening with rage. $400 I sent back east, and they send me damaged goods? Clara's hands shook as she tried to respond. Mr. Hartley, my letters never claimed. Your letters never mentioned you were a freak. The word cut through the air like a miner's pickaxe. I wanted a proper wife, not some carnival curiosity. What kind of children would come from a face like that? The crowd murmured, some with sympathy, others with the cruel excitement of those witnessing public humiliation. Clara saw a woman pull her young daughter closer, whispering urgently in her ear. Men averted their gazes while secretly stealing glances at her disfigurement. She felt exposed, naked despite her traveling dress and proper Eastern manners. Please, Clara managed, her voice breaking. If we could just speak privately. Nothing to speak about. William's rejection was absolute, final as a judge's gavel. Deal's off. I won't be made a fool of. He turned to address the crowd, gesturing dramatically. You all see what they tried to pass off on me. This is fraud, plain and simple. A child's voice pierced the air with innocent brutality. Mama, why does that lady's face look melted? The mother hushed him quickly, but the damage was done. Clara felt tears threatening, hot and shameful behind her eyes. She'd traveled 2,000 miles for this moment, had dared to hope that the West might offer what the East had denied her. Acceptance, love, a chance at a normal life. Where am I supposed to go? She asked, hating how small her voice sounded. I have nowhere. Not my problem, William cut her off. Should have thought of that before you tried to trick an honest man. There's a boarding house at the end of town, but I doubt Mrs. Patterson takes in confidence women. The accusation was too much. Clara straightened her spine, finding a spark of the pride that had sustained her through years of rejection. I never lied to you, Mr. Hartley. You never asked about my appearance, only about my education and domestic skills. Everything I wrote was true. Everything except the part that mattered. William's face was purple now, veins standing out on his neck. Get her out of my sight before I... That's enough. The voice came from the edge of the crowd, deep and steady as mountain bedrock. Clara turned to see a man stepping forward, and her first thought was that he moved differently than the others, with purpose, but without aggression, like someone accustomed to handling both fire and frightened animals. He was tall, but not imposing, lean in the way of men who worked with their hands. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar, and his work clothes bore the marks of his trade, small burns and tears mended with careful stitches. But it was his hands that drew Clara's attention. Even from several feet away, she could see the scars that covered them, angry red marks and puckered white tissue that spoke of terrible burns endured and survived. This ain't your business, Morrison, William growled, but some of his bluster had faded. Woman tried to swindle me. The man called Morrison stepped closer, and Clara saw his face clearly for the first time. It was weathered by sun and wind, with deep brown eyes that held neither pity nor revulsion, as they met hers briefly before turning back to William. From where I stand, Hartley, the only swindler here is the man who'd judge a woman's worth by her face alone. A ripple went through the crowd. Some nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably. William's hand dropped to the gun at his hip, a gesture more of habit than real threat. You defending this creature? Morrison's scarred hands clenched briefly at his sides, but his voice remained level. I'm defending common decency, something that seems in short supply today. He glanced around at the gathered townspeople, many of whom suddenly found the ground fascinating. "Show's over. Don't you all have business to attend to?" The authority in his voice was quiet, but unmistakable. Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd began to disperse. Mothers ushered children away, men returned to their conversations, and life in Copper Falls resumed its rhythm. But the damage was done. Clara stood in the street like a statue, her veil hanging uselessly from one hand, her carefully constructed hopes scattered like autumn leaves. William made one last attempt at dominance. "She's your problem now, Morrison. Don't come crying to me when... Get back to your store, Hartley." Morrison's voice had dropped even lower, carrying a warning that made the larger man step back. "Before you say something you'll regret." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. With a final, disgusted look at Clara, William stalked away, his boots ringing on the boardwalk like hammer blows. The street emptied quickly after that, leaving Clara alone with the stranger who'd defended her. She found herself studying him more carefully now, noting the way he kept his scarred hands partially hidden in his pockets, the slight hunch of his shoulders as if he too knew the weight of public scrutiny. "Thank you," she managed, though the words felt inadequate. "Though I'm not sure what good it's done, I still have nowhere to go." Morrison regarded her thoughtfully, and she was struck by the lack of disgust in his gaze. He looked at her the way he might examine a piece of metal, assessing its properties, its potential, not its surface appearance. "There's a spare room at my place," he said finally, "above the forge. It's not fancy, but it's clean and warm. You're welcome to it until you figure out your next move." Clara stared at him, searching for the catch. In her experience, men didn't offer help without expecting something in return. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Maybe because I know what it's like to have folks judge you by your scars instead of your character." He pulled one hand from his pocket, letting her see the full extent of the damage. The burns extended from his fingertips nearly to his elbow, the skin twisted and discolored in patterns that spoke of unimaginable pain endured. "I'm Thomas Morrison," he continued, extending that scarred hand to her with no trace of self-consciousness. "Tom to most folks. I run the blacksmith shop on the other end of town." Clara looked at his offered hand, then at his face. There was something in his eyes, not pity, not charity, but a simple recognition of shared experience. Slowly she reached out and took his hand, feeling the rough texture of scar tissue against her palm. "Clara Bennett," she said, "and I accept your offer, Mr. Morrison, with gratitude." He nodded, releasing her hand gently. "Tom," he corrected, "and we should get moving. Looks like snow coming in over the mountains, and you're not dressed for a Montana winter." As Clara retrieved her valise, she caught sight of William Hartley watching from his store window, his face twisted with anger and something else, perhaps regret, perhaps just wounded pride. She turned away, following Tom Morrison down the dusty street toward whatever sanctuary he offered. The wind picked up as they walked, carrying the scent of pine and the distant ring of hammers from the mines. Clara noticed how people nodded respectfully to Tom as they passed, their eyes sliding over her with curiosity, but no open hostility. He walked beside her, not ahead or behind, matching his pace to hers, without comment. "You've been kind," she said as they passed the last of the Main Street buildings. "But I should tell you, I have some money saved. I can pay for the room." Tom glanced at her, that almost smile appearing again. "We'll work something out. For now, let's just get you settled. Tomorrow's soon enough to figure out the rest." The forge came into view as they rounded a curve in the road. It was a solid structure of timber and stone, with smoke rising from a chimney and the sound of horses in a nearby paddock. Behind it, stood a modest house, well-maintained, despite its simple construction. Clara felt something ease in her chest at the sight. This wasn't the grand home William's letters had promised, but it had a welcoming quality that his prosperity couldn't buy. "The room's up those stairs," Tom said, pointing to an external staircase on the side of the building. "Used to be my apprentice quarters, but I haven't taken on a new boy since." He trailed off, a shadow crossing his face. "Well, it's been empty a while, might be a bit dusty." Clara climbed the stairs, aware of Tom following with her bag. The door opened onto a small but clean space. A bed with a faded quilt, a washstand, a small table and chair by the window. It was sparse but somehow perfect, a blank slate where she could catch her breath and decide what came next. "There's a pump out back for water," Tom was saying, setting her bag by the door. "And the privy's behind the house. I'll bring up some firewood for the stove. Gets cold at night this time of year." Clara turned from the window to face him. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, needing to understand. "You could have. Just let William send me away. Most people would have." Tom was quiet for a long moment, his scarred hands resting on the doorframe. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain transformed into hard-won wisdom. 8 years ago, a stable fire took these." He held up his hands, studying them as if seeing them anew. "Lost my apprenticeship back east. No one would hire a blacksmith who couldn't hold a hammer proper. Came out here figuring I'd start over, maybe find work in the mines." He paused, looking out the window at the forge below. "First day in Copper Falls, I stood in that same spot where you were today. Different circumstances, but same look in people's eyes. Old Sam Morrison, no relation, just coincidence with the name. He was the blacksmith then. Didn't say much, just handed me a hammer and pointed at his anvil. 'Show me what you can do,' he said. Didn't care about my hands, just my skill." Clara found herself moving closer, drawn by the quiet pain in his voice. "What happened to him?" "Mining accident 3 years back, left me the forge in his will, said I'd earned it." Tom's smile was sad but genuine. "Figured I owed it to Sam to pay that kindness forward when I could." The room fell silent, except for the distant sound of the wind in the pines. Clara felt tears threatening again, but these were different. Tears of relief, of gratitude, of finding unexpected grace in a hard place. "I don't know what to say." "Don't need to say anything." Tom moved toward the door, then paused. "I'll bring up that firewood, and if you're hungry, I usually eat around sundown. Nothing fancy, but you're welcome to join me." After he left, Clara stood at the window, watching him cross the yard to the woodpile. His movements were efficient, practiced, those scarred hands handling the axe with surprising dexterity. She thought about William Hartley's cruel words, about the crowd's eager consumption of her humiliation, about all the times she'd been rejected for something beyond her control. But she also thought about Tom Morrison's quiet dignity, about the way he'd stood up for her without making her feel weak, about the simple offer of shelter with no strings attached. Perhaps the West wasn't the fairy tale she'd imagined, but maybe it offered something better. A chance to be judged by character rather than appearance, to find community among others who understood the weight of difference. As the first snowflakes began to fall, dusting the mountains with white, Clara unpinned her traveling hat and set it on the table. She wouldn't hide behind veils anymore. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions to make. But for tonight, she had a warm room, the promise of a simple meal, and the knowledge that at least one person in Copper Falls saw her as more than her scars. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced Tom's return. He shouldered the door, open, arms full of split wood, and Clara moved to help him stack it by the small stove. Their hands brushed as they worked, scarred skin against scarred skin, and neither of them flinched away. The morning sun painted Copper Falls in shades of gold and amber, casting long shadows across the frost-covered ground. Clara woke to the sound of metal striking metal, a rhythmic clanging that spoke of work already begun. She rose from the narrow bed, her body stiff from the journey and the emotional toll of yesterday's events. Through the small window she could see Tom Morrison at his forge, sparks flying as he shaped glowing iron with precise hammer blows. She dressed carefully, choosing her most modest dress, a dark blue wool that had seen better days but remained serviceable. Her fingers hesitated at her throat, where she usually pinned a high collar to hide the scars that crept up from her jaw. After a moment's deliberation, she left it lower than usual. If she was to make a new life here, perhaps it was time to stop hiding. The stairs creaked under her feet as she descended, the morning air sharp with the scent of pine and coal smoke. Tom looked up from his work as she approached, setting aside his hammer with care. Sweat had darkened his shirt despite the cool. Temperature and soot marked his forearms where his sleeves were rolled back. "Sleep well?" he asked, reaching for a rag to wipe his hands. The morning light revealed new details about him. The way he favored his left hand slightly, the careful precision of his movements, the thin white scar that ran along his jaw, partially hidden by stubble. "Better than I expected," Clara admitted. "The sound of the forge is oddly comforting. Reminds me of the factory districts back home." Tom nodded, a gesture that seemed to encompass understanding of both her words and what lay beneath them. Coffees, still warm on the stove inside. "Help yourself. I've got to finish this horseshoe before Jake Miller comes for his mare." Clara watched him return to his work, noting the grace with which he moved around the dangerous equipment. Despite his scarred hands, he handled the tools with a delicacy that spoke of years of practice and adaptation. She made her way to the small house attached to the forge, finding it much as she'd expected. Functional, clean, with touches that revealed a life lived alone, but not uncared for. The coffee was strong enough to stand a spoon in, but Clara welcomed its bitter warmth. She found bread in a simple wooden box and cut herself a thick slice, spreading it with butter from a crock. In the cool pantry, as she ate, she studied the room more carefully. Books lined one shelf, mostly technical manuals, but with a few novels mixed in. A chess set sat on a side table, the pieces carved from local wood. Everything spoke of a man who valued utility, but hadn't entirely abandoned small pleasures. The front door burst open without warning, making Clara jump and nearly spill her coffee. A woman swept in like a force of nature, tall, broad-shouldered, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that missed nothing. She wore a practical brown dress covered by a flour-dusted apron, and her arms were full of what appeared to be folded fabric. "You must be the girl from the train," the woman announced without preamble. "Whole town's talking about Hartley's performance yesterday. Man's a fool and always has been. I'm Maggie Sullivan. I run the dress shop, though that's not all I do in this town." Clara set down her cup, unsure how to respond to this whirlwind arrival. "Clara Bennett. I'm sorry, but Mr. Morrison isn't—" "Oh, I know where Tom is. Can hear that hammer from my shop clear across town. I came to see you." Maggie deposited her bundle on the table and began sorting through it with efficient movements. "Brought some things you might need. This altitude's colder than what you're used to back east, I'd wager." Clara stared as Maggie unpacked several wool shawls, thick stockings, and what appeared to be a heavy cloak lined with fur. "I can't accept these. I have money to pay." "Course you do," Maggie interrupted, fixing her with a stern look that somehow managed to be kind. "And you will when you're settled. For now, consider it neighborly concern. Can't have you freezing to death before you decide whether to stay or go." The casual assumption that she had choices, that staying was even a possibility, caught Clara off guard. "I'm not sure I'll be staying after yesterday." Maggie snorted, a sound that conveyed volumes about her opinion of yesterday's events. If you let fools like William Hartley drive you off, you won't last anywhere. Besides, Tom Morrison doesn't offer his help lightly. Man's particular about who he lets into his life. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. He's been very kind. I don't want to impose. Tom Morrison hasn't had a real conversation with anyone outside of business in the 3 years I've known him, Maggie said bluntly. Yesterday was the most I've heard him speak at once since Sam's funeral. You're not imposing if he says you're not. The older woman's assessment hung in the air between them. Clara picked up one of the shawls, running her fingers over the soft wool. It was good quality, better than anything she'd brought with her. Why are you doing this? You don't know me either. Maggie's expression softened slightly. Maybe because I've been the stranger in town myself. Came here 15 years ago, widow with 2 small children and barely enough money to rent a room. This place can be hard on outsiders, but it can also surprise you with kindness when you least expect it. She paused, studying Clara with those sharp eyes. Besides, any woman brave enough to travel across the country alone deserves a fair chance. The sound of voices outside interrupted them. Through the window, Clara could see Tom talking with another man beside a beautiful chestnut mare. Money changed hands, and the customer led his horse away with a wave. Tom glanced toward the house, and Clara thought she saw surprise flicker across his face when he noticed Maggie's presence. I should go, Clara said quickly. I need to figure out what to do next. Perhaps there's work to be found. Already ahead of you, Maggie announced. I need help in the shop. My girl Mary just got married and moved to Butte. Can you sew? Clara blinked at the sudden shift. Yes, I worked in a dressmaker's shop in Philadelphia before. She trailed off, not wanting to finish the sentence. With before the fever changed everything. Good. Come by tomorrow morning. We'll see what you can do. Maggie gathered her apron, preparing to leave. And don't let Tom feed you nothing but beans and biscuits. Man can shoe a horse blindfolded, but can barely boil water without burning it. With that pronouncement, she swept out as suddenly as she'd arrived, leaving Clara slightly dazed in her wake. Tom entered a moment later, pausing in the doorway as if uncertain of his welcome in his own home. I see you've met Maggie, he said. Dryly, hurricane force, that woman. She offered me work, Clara said, still processing the rapid turn of events. I'm not sure I should accept. People might not want to buy dresses from someone who looks like me. Tom moved to the stove, pouring himself coffee with those scarred hands that never trembled despite their appearance. Maggie Sullivan doesn't make offers she doesn't mean. And folks here need clothes more than they need to indulge their prejudices. Winter's coming, and vanity freezes quick at this altitude. The practicality of his words carried a different kind of comfort than empty. Reassurances might have. Clara found herself relaxing slightly, the knot of anxiety in her chest loosening. She said, you don't talk much, but you've said plenty to me. Tom's smile was rueful. Maybe I just needed the right person to talk to. He set down his cup, seeming to come to a decision. I need to pick up some supplies in town. You could come along, get the lay of the land. Fair warning, though. Folks will stare. Clara thought about hiding in the small room above the forge, about veiling her face and creeping through shadows as she'd done for years. Then she thought about Tom's quiet courage the day before, about Maggie's matter-of-fact kindness, about the possibility of a life lived in the open. Let them stare, she said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. I'm tired of hiding. The town was busier than it had been the previous evening. Miners heading to their shifts trudged past in groups, lunch pails swinging. Women swept boardwalks and tended small gardens before the sun grew too warm. Children played in the dusty street, their voices carrying on the thin mountain air. Clara walked beside Tom, acutely aware of the attention they drew. Conversations paused as they passed, heads turned to follow their progress. But something was different from yesterday. The looks were curious rather than cruel, and several people nodded to Tom with what seemed like respect. "Morrison," a gruff voice called out. An older man with a sheriff's star on his vest approached, his weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. "Heard you had some excitement yesterday." "Sheriff Brooks," Tom acknowledged. "Nothing that couldn't be handled." The sheriff's gaze moved to Clara, and she braced herself for the familiar recoil. Instead, he touched the brim of his hat politely. "Ma'am, welcome to Copper Falls. Don't let Hartley's foolishness speak for all of us." Clara managed a small smile. "Thank you, Sheriff." They moved on, stopping at the general store. Not Hartley's, Tom was careful to point out, but a smaller establishment run by a Scottish couple named McPherson. The proprietor, a compact man with startling red hair, greeted Tom warmly and showed no reaction to Clara's appearance beyond polite interest. "This is Clara Bennett," Tom introduced her. "She'll be staying in town for a while." "Pleasure, miss," McPherson said, his accent rolling the words musically. "My wife Sarah's been asking after you. Said any woman brave enough to face down William Hartley in public deserves a warm welcome." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks again. "I didn't exactly face him down. Mr. Morrison did that." Well, Tom's good at that. Standing up for folks, I mean." McPherson began gathering the items on Tom's list: nails, oil, various metal implements Clara couldn't identify, though he usually does it quieter-like. They visited several more establishments. The butcher shop, where a German immigrant named Hans wrapped salt pork with blood-stained efficiency. The bakery, where the aroma of fresh bread made Clara's stomach growl. The hardware store, where Tom engaged in a lengthy discussion about different grades of steel. At each stop, the pattern repeated: initial curiosity, polite introduction, gradual acceptance. As they walked back toward the forge, arms full of packages, Clara marveled at how different this felt from her life in Philadelphia. There, she'd been a pariah, whispered about in drawing rooms, crossed off invitation lists, treated as either a figure of pity or an object of morbid curiosity. Here, she was simply the new woman in town, notable more for her association with the respected Blacksmith than for her disfigurement. "You did that on purpose," she said suddenly, understanding dawning. "Took me around, introduced me, you're vouching for me." Tom adjusted his grip on a heavy sack of coal. "People here judge by actions more than appearances. Most of them anyway. Figured it was better to get the looking over with all at once." They were passing the church when a small figure darted out from behind a wagon. A boy of perhaps 7 or 8, all knees and elbows and unruly brown hair. He skidded to a halt in front of Tom, nearly causing him to drop his packages. Mr. Tom, Pa says to tell you the plow blade's ready. He fixed it just like you showed him." The boy's excitement was infectious, his whole body vibrating with energy. Tom's stern expression softened. "That's good news, Timothy. Tell your pa I'll stop by later to check his work." The boy's attention shifted to Clara, and she steeled herself. Children were often the cruelest in their honest observations. Timothy stared for a long moment, then asked with innocent directness, "Did you get burned too? Like Mr. Tom?" "Timothy!" a woman's voice called sharply. A harried-looking young mother hurried toward them, flour dusting her apron. "I'm so sorry," she began, then stopped as she recognized Clara. "Oh, you're from yesterday." Clara felt Tom tense beside her, but she found her voice before he could intervene. "It's all right. Children are naturally curious." She knelt to Timothy's level, meeting his wide eyes. "I wasn't burned. I was very sick when I was younger. The marks are scars from the illness." Timothy nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. "My sister had spots from the measles, but they went away. Yours didn't." "No, mine stayed." The boy considered this. Pa says Mr. Tom's the best blacksmith in the territory, even with his burned hands. Maybe you're the best at something. 2, even with your spots. The innocent logic of children. Clara felt tears threaten and blinked them back. Maybe I am. I'll have to find out. Timothy's mother, Mrs. Walker, Tom supplied, apologized again, but there was something different in her manner now. Less fear, more understanding. As they walked on, Clara heard the woman say to her son, "That was kind, what you said." "Just told the truth, Ma. Pa always says Mr. Tom proves that scars don't matter if your work's good." Back at the forge, they unpacked their purchases in companionable silence. Tom returned to his work while Clara organized the supplies, finding an unexpected satisfaction in creating order from chaos. The afternoon passed quietly, marked only by the rhythm of hammer on anvil and the occasional customer seeking repairs. As evening approached, Tom banked the forge fires and washed the day's grime from his hands and face at the pump. Clara watched from the doorway, noting how he moved with economy of motion, every gesture purposeful. She thought about her life in Philadelphia, the enforced idleness, the careful social restrictions, the constant awareness of being watched and found wanting. "I'll start supper," she offered, surprising herself. "Unless you prefer to cook." Tom looked up from drying his hands, water droplets still clinging to his dark hair. "I survive on my own cooking. Having someone who actually knows what they're doing would be a welcome change." Clara found the kitchen adequately stocked, if heavy on preserved goods. She set about making a simple stew with the salt pork they'd bought, adding vegetables from the root cellar and herbs from dried bundles hanging near the window. The familiar actions soothed her, reminding her of helping her mother before everything changed. They ate by lamplight as darkness settled over Copper Falls. The stew was basic but hearty, and Tom's appreciation seemed genuine. Conversation came, easier now, flowing from topic to topic, the challenges of mountain weather, the boom and bust nature of mining towns, books they'd both read. "You're educated," Tom observed, not quite a question. "My parents valued learning. Father was a teacher before he died. Mother worked as a seamstress to keep us afloat, but she insisted I finish school." Clara paused, memories surfacing. "After the fever, when it became clear I wouldn't marry well, she made sure I learned practical skills. Beauty fades, she used to say, but knowing how to earn your keep lasts forever." Wise woman. Tom pushed his empty bowl aside. "What made you answer Hartley's advertisement?" Clara had dreaded this question, but found it easier to answer than expected. Desperation partly. Mother died 2 years ago. I'd been managing at the dress shop, but the owner's daughter returned from abroad and needed my position. Other shops. She shrugged, the gesture encompassing years of rejection. "Let's say my face wasn't considered good for business." "Their loss," Tom said quietly. The advertisement seemed like a chance at something different. Mr. Hartley's letters painted such a picture. The wide open spaces, the freedom from society's constraints, the possibility of being valued for more than appearance. Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I should have known better, should have questioned why a prosperous merchant couldn't find a local bride." "Hartley's had 3 mail-order brides in 5 years, Tom revealed. "Each one left within months. Man has specific ideas about what he wants and no patience when reality doesn't match." Clara absorbed this information, feeling foolish for not investigating more thoroughly. "And everyone knows this?" "Most do, but Hartley's wealthy, influential. People look the other way." Tom's expression darkened. Or they did. Yesterday might have changed that. The fire crackled in the stove, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Clara gathered their dishes, needing movement to process her thoughts. At the wash basin, she felt rather than heard Tom approach behind her. "You don't have to do this," he said. "The cooking, cleaning, you're a guest, not a servant." Clara turned to face him, aware suddenly of how close they stood. "I need to contribute. You've given me shelter, defended me publicly, introduced me around town. I can't just take. Why not? The question seemed to surprise him as much as her. Sometimes people need help. Doesn't always have to be a transaction. In my experience, it does, especially for women like me. We learn early that kindness comes with expectations. Tom was quiet for a long moment, and Clara wondered if she'd offended him. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than angry. Maybe that's the difference between East and West. Out here we help because winter doesn't care about your bank balance, and mountains don't notice your social standing. Survival sometimes depends on giving without counting the cost. The philosophy was seductive in its simplicity. Clara wanted to believe it, wanted to trust that this place could be different, but years of disappointment had taught her caution. Still, let me cook while I'm here. I enjoy it and you need decent meals. Fair enough. Tom stepped back, the moment of intimacy broken. I should check the horses before full dark. Make yourself at home. Alone in the quiet house, Clara finished the dishes and tidied the kitchen. Through the window, she could see Tom moving among the horses in the paddock, his tall figure silhouetted against the dying light. One of the horses, a grey mare with a white blaze, nuzzled his shoulder affectionately. She thought about Timothy's innocent words, about Mrs. Walker's gradual warming, about Maggie Sullivan's practical kindness. Perhaps she'd been too quick to assume Copper Falls would be like Philadelphia. Perhaps there was something to Tom's philosophy about survival demanding different values. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the mountains outlined sharply against a sky of impossible blue. Clara dressed carefully for her first day at Maggie's shop, choosing her best work dress and pinning her hair in a style that didn't emphasize her scars, but didn't hide them either. Progress, she thought, checking her reflection in the small mirror. Tom had already started work when she came downstairs, but he'd left coffee warming and a note in careful script. Good luck today. You'll do fine. Tea. The simple encouragement warmed her more than the coffee. She set out for town with determined steps, nodding to the people she recognized from yesterday's tour. Some nodded back, others stared, but the curiosity seemed less hostile now. Maggie's shop occupied a corner building on the main street, its windows displaying practical garments rather than the elaborate confections Clara had seen in Philadelphia boutiques. A bell chimed as she entered, and Maggie emerged. From the back room, pins bristling from a cushion at her wrist. Punctual, good start. She gestured to a work table piled with fabric. Let's see what you can do. Mrs. Henderson needs this dress taken in. Mining company diet doesn't agree with her, apparently. Clara examined the dress, a serviceable brown wool with good bones but poor construction. She began pinning adjustments, her hands steady despite her nerves. Maggie watched without comment, occasionally humming under her breath. Decent technique, Maggie pronounced after several minutes. Eastern training shows. You'll do. Relief flooded through Clara. Thank you. I promise I'll work hard. None of that now. Maggie waved dismissively. I don't do charity hiring. You're here because I need skilled hands, and yours qualify. We'll see about the rest. The morning passed quickly as Clara familiarized herself with the shop's inventory and methods. Customers came and went. Miners' wives needing sturdy clothes, saloon girls wanting repairs to their finery, even a few men seeking new shirts. Some reacted to Clara's appearance, but Maggie's fierce presence seemed to quell any open rudeness. Around midday, the bell chimed again, and a familiar voice made Clara's stomach clench. William Hartley stood in the doorway, his bulk filling the frame. His eyes found her immediately, narrowing with displeasure. Mrs. Sullivan, he began, ignoring Clara entirely. I heard you'd taken on new help. Surely you know this woman's history. I know she can sew a straight seam and doesn't gossip, Maggie interrupted, her tone deceptively mild. That's all the history I need. Hartley's face reddened. She's a fraud. Tried to trick me into marriage without revealing her. Deformity. What? Clara felt the familiar shame rising, but before she could shrink back, Maggie's voice cut through like a blade. William Hartley, you've bought 3 brides like cattle and run off each one with your temper and peculiar demands. If anyone's a fraud here, it's the man who pretends to be a gentleman while treating women like merchandise. The silence in the shop was deafening. Hartley's mouth worked soundlessly, his face now purple with rage. Finally, he managed. You'll regret this, both of you. I doubt it, Maggie replied calmly. Now, did you come to buy something or just to make threats? Because I've got work to do. Hartley stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Clara realized she was shaking and sank onto a stool. Maggie bustled over with a cup of tea that seemed to materialize from nowhere. Drink this. You look ready to faint. He'll cause trouble for you now, Clara said, accepting the cup gratefully. Bad for business. Maggie snorted. That man's been bad for business since he arrived. Drives hard bargains, extends credit to desperate folks, then forecloses when they can't pay. Half the town owes him money, but that doesn't mean they like him. But they need him. They think they do. Amazing how needs change when alternatives appear. Maggie's smile was sharp. Besides, his threats are mostly bluster. He's too fond of his reputation to do anything too obvious. Clara hoped she was right. The afternoon brought a steady stream of customers, and she threw herself into work, grateful for the distraction. Several women made pointed comments about hiring appropriate people, but Maggie deflected them with practiced ease. As closing time approached, the bell chimed one last time. Clara looked up from her hemming to find Tom in the doorway, hat in his scarred hands. His presence filled the small shop differently than Hartley's had. Solid and reassuring, rather than threatening. Ladies, he greeted them. Thought I'd walk you home, Clara. If you're finished here. Maggie raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Clara gathered her things, aware of the unspoken communication passing between Tom and the older woman. Outside, the evening air carried the first hint of winter's approach. Heard Hartley paid you a visit, Tom said as they walked. It wasn't really a question. Word travels fast. It's a small town. Hartley's been making noise all day about driving you out. Tom's voice was carefully neutral, but she saw the tension in his shoulders. Wanted to make sure you got home, safe. Clara felt a mixture of gratitude and frustration. I can't have you protecting me forever. People will talk. People are already talking. Let them. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. I should tell you. Hartley's been spreading rumors about us. Says I'm keeping you as... He trailed off, color rising in his cheeks. Clara could fill in the blank. Her own face burned, but anger override embarrassment. Of course he is. If he can't have me, he'll make sure I'm ruined for anyone else. I'm sorry. I should have thought... No! Clara stopped walking, forcing him to face her. You've done nothing wrong. Neither have I. If people want to believe Hartley's poison, that's their choice. Tom studied her face, and she saw something shift in his expression. You're tougher than you look. I've had to be. She resumed walking, wrapping her shawl tighter against the evening chill. What about you? Won't this hurt your business? Possibly, but I've survived worse. His smile was grim. Besides, sometimes the right thing costs more than the easy thing. Sam Morrison taught me that. They reached the forge as the sun touched the mountain peaks, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Clara paused at the foot of the stairs to her room, uncertain how to end the day. Tom seemed equally at loose ends. I made stew, she offered. There's plenty if you're hungry. I'd like that, he said simply. As she served their meal, Clara reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. A week ago, she'd been on a train heading toward what she thought was her future. Now she sat in a simple kitchen with a scarred blacksmith, discussing the day's events like what, friends? Something more? Tell me about Sam Morrison, she said, curious about the man who'd shaped Tom's philosophy. Tom's expression softened with memory. Tough as iron, soft as butter. That's how folks described him. Came here in the first gold rush, stayed when it played out, said he liked the mountains too much to leave. He paused, pushing food around his plate. Never married, no family anyone knew about, but he took care of people. Quiet-like, without fuss. Found kids to apprentice who needed homes more than skills, extended credit that never got collected, that sort of thing. He sounds wonderful. He was. Taught me more than blacksmithing. Taught me that a man's worth isn't in his appearance or his past, but in what he builds and who he helps along the way. Tom's scarred hands gestured unconsciously as he spoke. When I showed up, burned and bitter, he just handed me tools and pointed to the work. Never asked about the scars, never treated me as less capable, just expected me to learn and contribute. Clara heard the love and loss in his voice. You miss him. Every day. He was the father I never had, the friend I needed when the mind collapse took him. Tom stopped, swallowing hard. Found out after he died that he'd been saving his money for years. Left it all to me, along with the forge. Note just said, make it count. And you have. The respect people show you, that's not just for your skill. It's for who you are. Tom looked uncomfortable with the praise. I try to live up to what he taught me. Don't always succeed. They finished, eating in companionable silence. As Clara cleared the dishes, she noticed Tom, watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. What is it? Just thinking how different this feels, having someone here. Good different, he added quickly, but strange after being alone so long. Clara understood, the simple domesticity of sharing a meal, discussing the day's events. It was something she'd never expected to have. For me too, I'd resigned myself to spinsterhood, thought that was the price of looking like this. Philadelphia's loss, Tom said quietly, echoing his words from the previous night. But this time there was something more in his voice, something that made her pulse quicken. A knock at the door interrupted whatever might have followed. Tom opened it to find Sheriff Brooks, his weathered face grave. Tom, Miss Bennett, sorry to disturb your evening. What is it, Dan? Tom's posture had shifted subtly, ready for trouble. Hartley's been drinking, making threats at the saloon. Thought you should know he's working himself up to something. Foolish. Clara felt cold despite the warm room. What kind of threats? The sheriff's eyes were kind but worried. The kind drunk men make when their pride's been hurt. Nothing specific yet, but he's got some of the rougher elements listening. Best you both stay close to home tonight. After the sheriff left, Tom checked the locks and shutters with new attention. Clara watched him, anxiety building. I've brought this trouble to you. Maybe I should leave. No. The word was flat, final. Running doesn't solve anything. Besides, where would you go? The question hung between them. Where indeed? She had money for a ticket, but to what destination? Another town where she'd be a stranger? Another attempt at marriage to someone? Who might be worse than Hartley? I don't know, she admitted. I just don't want you hurt because of me. Tom turned from the window, his face set in determined lines. I've been hurt before. Survived it. What I couldn't survive is letting them drive you out when you've done nothing wrong. The intensity in his voice made her breath catch. They stood facing each other in the lamplit room, the air charged with unspoken possibilities. Clara felt herself swaying toward him, drawn by something stronger than gratitude or friendship. A sound outside broke the moment. Horses, several of them, and men's voices raised in drunken laughter. Tom's expression hardened. He moved to a cabinet, withdrawing a shotgun Clara hadn't noticed before. "Stay inside," he ordered, checking the weapon with practiced efficiency. "No matter what. You hear, Tom?" But he was already moving toward the door, that quiet determination settling over him like armor. Clara watched from the window as he stepped onto the porch, shotgun held loosely but ready. The yard filled with riders, 6 or 7, men with Hartley at their center. Even from here, she could smell the whiskey. "Morrison!" Hartley's voice was slurred but vicious. "Send out that scarred bitch. We're gonna teach her about deceiving honest men." Tom's response was too quiet for Clara to hear, but she saw its effect. Several riders shifted uneasily and, she recognized him as the young man from the hardware store, actually turned his horse to leave. "Don't pretend she's anything but a whore," Hartley continued, swaying in his saddle. "Everyone knows why you took her in. Might as well share with friends." Clara's hands clenched on the windowsill. The crude words were meant to hurt. And they did. But mostly, they made her angry. She'd done nothing but exist, and somehow that was crime enough for men like Hartley. Tom raised the shotgun slightly. The movement was small but significant. More riders began backing away, suddenly remembering. Urgent business elsewhere. Soon only Hartley and 2 others remained, hard-faced men Clara didn't recognize. "You boys, sure you want to stake your lives on Hartley's wounded pride?" Tom's voice carried now, calm but with steel beneath. "Man's not worth hanging for." One of the strangers spoke up. "He paid us good money." "Hope it was enough for your funeral," Tom interrupted, "because that's what you're buying if you stay." The stranger exchanged glances with his companion. Without a word, they wheeled their horses and rode off, leaving Hartley alone in the yard. His face was a mask of drunken rage, but also fear. The shotgun in Tom's hands never wavered. "This isn't over," Hartley managed, though his voice lacked its earlier bravado. "I'll see you both run out of town." "Maybe, but not tonight." Tom waited until Hartley had ridden away before lowering the weapon. Only then did Clara see the slight tremor in his hands. She flew out the door, not caring about his earlier order to stay inside. "Are you all right? I thought they might—" "They were mostly bark," Tom said, but his voice was rough. "Hartley's not popular enough to command real loyalty. Just had to remind them of that." Clara studied his face in the moonlight, seeing the strain beneath the calm facade. Without thinking, she reached up to touch his cheek. He froze at the contact, then slowly leaned into her palm. "Thank you," she whispered. "No one's ever stood up for me like that." His scarred hand covered hers, holding it against his face. Someone should have, long before now. They stood like that for a moment that stretched into eternity. Then, as if suddenly remembering propriety, they stepped apart. The night air felt cold without his warmth. "You should get some rest," Tom said, his voice carefully controlled. "Tomorrow might be difficult." Clara nodded, not trusting her own voice. As she climbed the stairs to her room, she could feel him watching. At her door, she turned back. He still stood in the yard, a solitary figure guarding against the darkness. Sleep eluded her for hours. She lay listening to the night sounds, wind in the pines, the distant howl of a wolf, the occasional creak of the building settling. But beneath it all was the memory of Tom's face when he'd leaned into her touch, the feeling of his scarred hand covering hers. She thought about Philadelphia, about the life she'd fled, the careful boundaries, the social restrictions, the constant awareness of her disfigurement. Here, she'd found work within days. Here, people judged her more by her actions than her appearance. The morning after Hartley's drunken threats dawned grey and cold, with clouds hanging low over the mountains like smoke. Clara woke to the sound of voices in the yard below. Not angry this time, but urgent, worried. She dressed quickly and hurried downstairs to find Tom talking with Sheriff Brooks and another man she didn't recognize. "Fire started around 3 this morning," the stranger was saying. He was older, with the weathered look of a long-time rancher. "Lost half my hay barn before we got it under control." Tom's expression was grim. "That's the 3rd fire this week. First the miller's chicken coop, then Peterson's tool shed, now this." "Ain't coincidence," Sheriff Brooks said flatly. "Someone's sending a message." Clara stepped onto the porch and all 3 men turned. The rancher's eyes widened slightly at her appearance, but he touched his hat politely. Tom moved closer to her, a protective gesture that wasn't lost on anyone present. "Miss Bennett, this is Carl Richardson, has a spread about 5 miles north of town." Tom's introduction was brief, his attention clearly on more pressing matters. "Carl, you see anyone around before the fire?" Richardson shook his head. "Dogs started barking, but time I got out there, flames were already going good. Found this, and though..." He pulled a piece of charred wood from his pocket. Carved into it were crude words. "Scarred witch brings curses." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "I'm so sorry. This is because of me." "No," Tom said firmly. "This is because someone's decided to use fear and destruction to get their way. That's not on you." Sheriff Brooks examined the wood fragment, his face thoughtful. "Hartley was drunk at the saloon until near midnight. Plenty of witnesses. But he's got money to pay others to do his dirty work. Can't arrest a man for what you can't prove," Richardson said pragmatically. He looked at Clara again, and she braced for condemnation. Instead, his weathered face creased in what might have been a smile. "My wife, Sarah, wants you to know you're welcome at our place for Sunday dinner. Said any woman who gets Hartley this riled up must be worth knowing." The unexpected kindness nearly broke Clara's composure. She managed to thank him, her voice thick with emotion. After Richardson left, Sheriff Brooks lingered, his manner hesitant. "There's something else," he said finally. "Hartley's been sending telegrams to Philadelphia, making inquiries about your background, Miss Bennett." Clara's stomach knotted. What could he hope to find? "I never claimed to be anything I'm not." "Men like Hartley don't need truth," Tom said darkly. "They just need enough ammunition to cause doubt." The sheriff nodded agreement. "Thought you should know. Be careful, both of you. Desperate men do foolish things." After he left, Clara sank onto the porch steps, overwhelmed by the escalating situation. "Maybe I should go before someone gets seriously hurt." Tom sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Running won't stop him now. He's invested too much in this vendetta. Besides, leaving would just confirm whatever story he's spinning. "Then what do I do?" "What you've been doing. Work. Live. Show people who you really are." His voice softened. "Don't let him take that from you." Clara turned to study his profile, noting the determined set of his jaw, the way morning light caught in his dark hair. "Why does this matter so much to you? It can't just be about doing the right thing." Tom was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost reluctant. "Maybe because I remember what it's like to lose everything, to have people look at you and see only damage. Or maybe..." He turned to meet her gaze, and something in his eyes made her heart race. "Maybe because you matter to me more than I expected." The confession hung between them, fragile as morning frost. Clara felt words crowding her throat, gratitude, fear, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. Before she could speak, the sound of approaching horses interrupted. 3 riders came into view, and Clara recognized Maggie Sullivan's distinctive silhouette on the lead horse. With her rode 2 men, one elderly, one younger, both wearing expressions of determined purpose. "Tom Morrison," Maggie called out as they reined in. "We need to talk." Clara stood to go inside, assuming they wanted privacy, but Maggie's voice stopped her. "You too, Clara. This concerns you both." The riders dismounted, and Maggie made quick introductions. "Dr. Marcus Whitfield," she indicated the elderly man, who had the refined bearing of an educated Easterner, "and James Crawford, owns the largest mine in the county." Crawford was younger than Clara expected, perhaps 35, with shrewd eyes and calloused hands that suggested he hadn't always been management. He studied Clara with frank interest but no revulsion. "We've come about the Hartley situation," Maggie announced without preamble. "It's gotten out of hand." Dr. Whitfield spoke up, his voice cultured but firm. "I've been in Copper Falls for 20 years, seen my share of feuds and foolishness, but this campaign of harassment crosses a line. Bad for business too," Crawford added pragmatically. "Can't have fires breaking out every night. Makes investors nervous, makes workers nervous. Nervous workers make mistakes, and mistakes in mines cost lives." Tom crossed his arms, wariness in every line of his body. "What are you proposing?" Maggie smiled, but it wasn't entirely pleasant. "We're proposing to give Mr. Hartley something else to think about. Dr. Whitfield here has some interesting information about our righteous merchant's past." "Udi." The doctor adjusted his spectacles, looking uncomfortable but resolute. "I have colleagues in San Francisco, made some inquiries after yesterday's unpleasantness. It seems Mr. Hartley left rather suddenly 5 years ago. There was a scandal involving a young woman, a servant in his household." Clara felt her chest tighten. "What kind of scandal?" "The kind that results in hasty departures and sealed court records," Dr. Whitfield said delicately. "The girl's family was paid handsomely for their silence, but doctors talked to other doctors. She was injured permanently." The implications hung heavy in the morning air. Crawford's expression had hardened. "You're certain?" "Certain enough, though proving it legally would be difficult." "Don't need legal proof," Maggie said. "With satisfaction. Just need enough doubt to change the conversation. Let Hartley explain his own past before he goes digging into others." Clara felt sick. "You're talking about blackmail." "I'm talking about survival," Maggie corrected sharply. "Yours and Tom's. Sometimes you fight fire with fire." Tom had been silent throughout the exchange. Now he spoke, his voice careful. "Appreciate the concern, all of you, but this could escalate things beyond control." Crawford snorted. "Already beyond control when barns start burning. Question is whether you want to be reactive or proactive." "There's another factor," Dr. Whitfield added quietly. "I examined the Richardson boy last week, the one who works at Hartley's store. Found bruises, old ones and new. Boy wouldn't say how he got them, but..." The silence stretched, ugly with implication. Clara thought of young Timothy Walker's innocent face, imagined other children suffering. In silence, her resolve hardened. "What do you need us to do?" she asked. Tom looked at her in surprise. "Clara!" "No!" She faced him squarely. "I'm tired of being afraid, tired of letting men like Hartley control the narrative. If these people are willing to help, we should listen." Maggie's approving nod felt like a benediction. "Smart girl. Here's what we propose." The plan was simple but effective. Rather than confront Hartley directly, they would begin quietly spreading counter-narratives. Dr. Whitfield would mention his concerns about Hartley's past to select patients. Crawford would express doubts about Hartley's business practices to his mining associates. Maggie would ensure the women's sewing circle heard certain carefully chosen details. "Death by 1,000 cuts," Crawford summarized with grim satisfaction. "Man's built his power on reputation. Take that away, and what's left?" After the conspirators departed, Clara and Tom stood in the yard, processing what had just occurred. The mountains loomed around them, impassive witnesses to human drama. "You don't have to be part of this," Tom said finally. "It could get ugly." Clara surprised herself by laughing, though there was little humor in it. "It's already ugly. At least now we're not facing it alone." "No," Tom agreed, and his hand found hers, scarred fingers intertwining with her unmarked ones. "We're not alone." The rest of the day passed in strange normalcy. Clara went to work at Maggie's shop, where business was surprisingly brisk. Several women made pointed comments about standing by their own and not letting outsiders divide the town. She began to understand that Hartley's campaign might be backfiring, creating sympathy where he'd hoped to foster rejection. That evening, as she walked home, Clara noticed subtle changes in the town's atmosphere. Conversations hushed as she passed, but the looks were speculative rather than hostile. At the butcher shop, Hans's wife slipped an extra portion of stew meat into her order with a meaningful wink. The baker's daughter smiled shyly and pressed a fresh roll into her hands. Tom was waiting on the porch when she arrived, his expression troubled. "There's been another development. Hartley received a telegram this afternoon from Philadelphia." Clara's heart sank. "What did it say?" "Don't know the contents, but Jake at the telegraph office says Hartley looked mighty pleased. He's called a town meeting for tomorrow night. Says he has important information about the character of certain newcomers." The words hit Clara like physical blows. She sank onto the porch bench, suddenly exhausted. He found something. Somehow, he found something to use against me. Tom sat beside her, solid and reassuring. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. You're not the same person who left Philadelphia. This town's starting to see that." "But what if—" Clara stopped, old fears rising like floodwaters. What if there were records she didn't know about? Medical reports from her illness that painted her as contagious or defective, social registry entries that listed her as unmarriageable. The possibilities tormented her. Tom's arm settled around her shoulders, warm and protective. "Whatever Hartley thinks he's found, it doesn't change who you are now. The woman who works hard, helps neighbors, faces difficulty with grace. That's who people here are learning to know." Clara leaned into his strength, allowing herself this moment of vulnerability. "I'm frightened," she admitted, "not of leaving or starting over again, but of losing this, what we're building." "You won't lose it," Tom said firmly. "I won't let that happen." The absolute certainty in his voice made her turn to look at him. What she saw in his eyes stole her breath. Not pity or mere kindness, but something deeper, fiercer. Before she could lose her courage, she reached up and touched his face, tracing the line of a thin scar along his jaw. "How did you really get burned?" she asked softly. "You've never said." Tom's expression shuttered briefly, then opened again, with visible effort. "Industrial accident. I was apprenticed to a blacksmith in Pittsburgh. Good man, taught me well. But the factory next door caught fire, boiler explosion. The flames spread to our shop before we could get the horses out." His voice had gone distant, lost in memory. "I went back in, saved 3 of the 4 horses, but the roof beam came down, trapped my arms under burning timber. Master Thompson pulled me out, but the damage was done. Hands were so bad, doctors wanted to amputate." Clara's fingers found his scarred hands, holding them gently. "But you kept them. Stubborn, I guess. Spent months learning to use them again. Had to develop new techniques, new ways of holding tools. Most people said I was finished as a smith. Maybe that's why I came west, to prove them wrong." "And you did?" "Eventually. After plenty of failure and frustration, Sam Morrison gave me the chance to try." Tom looked down at their joined hands. "That's why Hartley's wrong about you. Scars don't define us. How we carry them does." The moment stretched between them. charged with understanding and something more. Clara felt herself leaning closer, drawn by invisible threads of connection. Tom's free hand rose to cup her face, thumb brushing the scarred skin of her cheek with infinite tenderness. "Clara," he breathed, and her name on his lips was prayer and promise combined. The kiss, when it came, was gentle as morning light, careful as if they both feared breaking something precious. Clara felt tears slip down her cheeks, not of sadness, but of recognition. This was what she'd traveled 2,000 miles to find, not a business arrangement masquerading as marriage, but genuine connection with someone who saw past surfaces to truth beneath. When they drew apart, Tom rested his forehead against hers. "Whatever happens tomorrow night, remember this: you're not alone anymore." The town meeting was held in the church, the largest building in Copper Falls. By the time Clara and Tom arrived, it was already packed. People filled the pews and lined the walls, their faces curious, concerned, or grimly determined. Hartley stood at the front, poorly concealing his satisfaction. Sheriff Brooks maintained order from the side, his presence a reminder that law still held sway. Dr. Whitfield sat in the front row, flanked by several other prominent citizens. Maggie Sullivan held court near the middle, surrounded by her sewing. Circle ladies like a general with her troops. "Thank you all for coming," Hartley began, his voice carrying easily. "I've called this meeting because it's come to my attention that we've been deceived, that someone has entered our community under false pretenses." Clara felt every eye in the room turn toward her. Tom's hand found hers, squeezing reassuringly. She lifted her chin, refusing to cower. "Miss Clara Bennett," Hartley continued with theatrical emphasis, presented herself as a respectable woman seeking marriage. What she failed to mention were certain details about her past. He produced a telegram with flourish. "I have here communication from the Philadelphia Register of Social Standing. It states that Miss Bennett was officially listed as unsuitable for marriage due to her disfiguring condition. Furthermore, she was dismissed from her position at Madame Rousseau's dress emporium for, and I quote, disturbing the clientele with her appearance." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Clara felt heat flood her face, but she held her position. The words were true, technically, but stripped of context, they sounded damning. Hartley wasn't finished. "There's more. Medical records indicate she suffered from a severe case of scarlet fever that left her face permanently marked. Such illnesses can recur, potentially endangering our children, yet she concealed this risk." "That's not true!" Clara stood, her voice ringing clear. "Scarlet fever doesn't recur once you've had it. Any doctor knows that." Dr. Whitfield rose smoothly. "Miss Bennett is correct. I'd be happy to explain the medical facts to anyone concerned." Hartley's face reddened. "Regardless, she came here under false pretenses." "Did she?" James Crawford's voice cut through the noise. The mine owner stood, commanding attention. Did she claim to be unmarked? Did she promise beauty she didn't possess? Or did you, Hartley, make assumptions based on your own shallow requirements? The momentum shifted. Hartley scrambled to regain control. "She should have disclosed, like you disclosed the servant girl in San Francisco." Dr. Whitfield's question fell like a hammer blow. "The one whose family you paid for silence? Perhaps we should discuss full disclosure, Mr. Hartley." The room erupted, accusations flew, voices raised in anger and defense. Through it all, Clara stood frozen, overwhelmed by the turn of events. Sheriff Brooks's whistle cut through the chaos. "Order! We'll have order!" Gradually, the noise subsided. "This isn't a trial. We're not here to drag everyone's past through the mud." "Agreed," said Reverend Mills, rising from his seat near the altar. His voice carried the weight of moral authority. But perhaps it's time we examined what truly matters in our community. Are we the kind of place that judges by appearance, that drives out those seeking honest work and genuine connection? An older woman Clara recognized from the sewing circle stood. I've watched Miss Bennett these past days. She works hard, treats others kindly, carries herself with dignity despite provocation. That tells me more about her character than any telegram. Hear, hear, several voices chorused. Hans, the butcher, rumbled agreement. The baker's wife nodded. Emphatically, Maggie Sullivan rose like an avenging angel. William Hartley, you've had 3 mail-order brides, and you've driven each one away with your temper and peculiar demands. Now you seek to destroy a woman's reputation because she had the audacity to reject your cruelty. I ask you all, who's the real fraud here? The tide had turned decisively. Hartley stood isolated at the front, his support evaporated. His face cycled through rage, disbelief, and finally a kind of defeated fury. You're all fools, he spat, taken in by a scarred witch and her blacksmith protector. But mark my words, you'll regret this, you'll all regret this. He stormed out, leaving shocked silence in his wake. Then slowly people began to approach Clara. Not all, but enough. They offered quiet words of support, gentle touches on her shoulder, nods of acceptance. The wall of isolation Hartley had tried to build crumbled brick by brick. Later, as the church emptied, Reverend Mills approached Clara and Tom. I believe congratulations are in order, he said with a meaningful smile. You've weathered the storm. Thanks to our friends, Tom replied, his arm around Clara's waist, feeling natural now, right? Indeed, community shows its true character in crisis. The Reverend's eyes twinkled. I hope I'll be seeing more of you both. Perhaps for happier occasions. After he left, Clara turned to Tom, emotions overwhelming her. I can't believe it. They defended me. People who barely know me stood up against Hartley. They stood up for what's right, Tom corrected gently, and for someone they're learning to respect. You earned that, Clara, not through hiding or pretending, but by being yourself. The walk home was quiet, both of them processing the evening's events. The stars were brilliant overhead, unmarred by city smoke or eastern humidity. Clara breathed deeply, feeling something settle in her chest. Not quite peace, but the possibility of it. Back at the forge, Tom built up the fire while Clara made tea. The domestic routine felt precious now, worth fighting for. They sat together on the small sofa, shoulders touching, watching flames dance behind the grate. Hartley won't give up, Clara said eventually. He's too proud, too angry. Probably not, Tom agreed. But he's lost his moral authority. Whatever he tries now will be seen as spite, not justice. Clara set down her cup, turning to face him fully. Tom, what are we building here? You and I. He was quiet for a moment, choosing words carefully. What do you want to build? The question hung between them, laden with possibility. Clara thought about Philadelphia, about years of loneliness and rejection, about the train journey west, fueled by desperate hope, about standing on that platform, unveiled and humiliated, certain her life was over. Then she thought about these past days, about quiet mornings in the kitchen, sharing meals and conversation, about the way Tom looked at her, not through her or past her, but directly at her, seeing everything and flinching from nothing. About the kiss they'd shared, gentle and profound. I want to build a life, she said finally. A real life, with work that matters and people who judge by character, not appearance. And she took a breath, gathering courage. I want to build it with you. Tom's smile transformed his face, years of guarded solitude melting away. I was hoping you'd say that. He took her hands in his scarred ones. I'm not an easy man, Clara. Set in my ways, marked by past pain. But you've Awakened something I thought was dead. Hope, maybe, or just the ability to imagine future beyond mere survival. We're quite a pair, Clara said, tears threatening again. The scarred blacksmith and the marked bride. What will people say? Let them say what they will. We know the truth. Tom pulled her closer, and she went willingly, finding her place in the circle of his arms. Besides, I think we've got more support than we knew. This town might surprise us yet. They sat together as the fire burned low, planning quietly. Clara would continue at Maggie's shop, building her skill and reputation. Tom would expand the forge, maybe take on an apprentice. They'd face whatever Hartley threw at them, but they'd face it together. I should probably court you properly, Tom mused. Take you to church socials, Sunday picnics, give the gossips something pleasant to discuss. Clara laughed, the sound free and genuine. After everything that's happened, you want to observe proprieties? Some of them, the ones that matter. He grew serious again. You deserve to be courted, Clara. To have choices. Don't want you feeling obligated because I helped you. She silenced him with a kiss, pouring weeks of gratitude and growing love into the contact. When they parted, both were breathless. I choose you, she said simply. Not from obligation or lack of options, but because you see me truly and find me worthy as I am. That's worth more than all the proper courtships in the world. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Clara was helping Tom organize the tool shed when a carriage pulled up. Not a humble wagon, but an elegant Eastern-style coach that looked absurdly out of place on the rutted mountain road. A man emerged, tall and silver-haired, dressed in clothes that screamed money and influence. Behind him came a younger woman, heavily veiled, moving with nervous grace. I'm looking for Miss Clara Bennett, the man announced, his cultured voice, carrying authority. Clara stepped forward, wary. I'm Clara Bennett. The man studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. My name is Jonathan Whitmore. This is my daughter, Elizabeth. We've traveled from Chicago because I heard about your situation. Tom moved protectively closer, but Clara put a restraining hand on his arm. What situation would that be, Mr. Whitmore? Your confrontation with William Hartley. News, travels, even to Chicago business circles. Whitmore's smile was thin, but not unkind. I have a proposition for you, Miss Bennett, a business proposition. The veiled woman, Elizabeth, spoke for the first time. Father, perhaps we should explain. Yes, of course. Whitmore gestured toward the house. Might we speak inside? This concerns my daughter as much as you. Curiosity overcoming caution, Clara led them into the small parlor. Tom followed, his presence a comforting anchor. Once seated, Whitmore came directly to the point. My daughter suffered from smallpox 2 years ago. She survived, but he gestured delicately toward Elizabeth's veil. The scarring was extensive. Since then, she's become a recluse, convinced her life is over. Elizabeth's hands twisted in her lap. Even through the veil, Clara could sense her distress. When I heard about you, Whitmore continued, about how you faced prejudice with dignity, found work and acceptance despite physical marking. I hope you might speak with Elizabeth, show her that life exists beyond disfigurement. Clara felt Tom tense beside her. The request was unexpected, laden with implications. But looking at Elizabeth's bowed head, she remembered her own years, of isolation and despair. I'll speak with her, Clara said quietly. But I can't promise miracles. Each person must find their own path to acceptance. Relief flooded Whitmore's face. That's all I ask. We've taken rooms at the hotel, perhaps tomorrow. After they left, Tom was unusually quiet. Clara found him in the forge, attacking a piece of iron with unnecessary force. You're upset, she observed. Not upset, concerned. He set down the hammer, turning to face her. That man has money, influence. He could offer you opportunities I never could, take you away from here, set you up in business anywhere." Clara heard the fear beneath his words, fear of losing what they'd barely begun to build. She crossed to him, taking his face in her hands as she had once before. "Thomas Morrison, listen to me. I've traveled across the country searching for home. I found it here, with you. No amount of money or influence could tempt me from that." The tension drained from his shoulders. "You're sure? Life with me won't be easy. Life anywhere won't be easy. But it will be real and honest and shared with someone who values me for myself." She smiled, feeling the truth of her words. Besides, who else would take in a marked bride and teach her to find beauty in scars? The next afternoon, Clara met with Elizabeth Whitmore in the hotel's small parlor. At first, the young woman refused to remove her veil, speaking in whispers about shame and ruined prospects. But gradually, as Clara shared her own story, the fever, the rejection, the journey west, the unexpected acceptance, Elizabeth began to relax. When she finally lifted the veil, Clara saw extensive scarring across the left side of her face and neck, but she also saw intelligence in the young woman's eyes, along with desperate hunger for hope. "It doesn't get easier," Clara said honestly. "People will stare, some will be cruel, but you learn to carry it differently, to find worth beyond appearance." "How?" Elizabeth's voice was plaintive. "I was beautiful once. Now you're experienced, tested, stronger than you know." Clara leaned forward, intense. "Beauty fades for everyone eventually, but courage, kindness, resilience, those grow stronger with use." They talked for hours. Clara introduced Elizabeth to Maggie Sullivan, who took the young woman under her wing with characteristic brusqueness. By the time the Whitmores prepared to leave 3 days later, Elizabeth was walking unveiled on Copper Falls streets, still nervous but determined to reclaim her life. "I owe you more than I can say," Jonathan Whitmore said, pressing a substantial check into Clara's hands. "This is just a token." "I can't accept this," Clara protested. "Then consider it investment in your future business. Maggie tells me you have real talent as a seamstress. Perhaps someday you'll open your own shop." His smile was knowing. "Besides, I have a feeling the Whitmore family will be ordering from you regularly. Elizabeth speaks of nothing but the dresses you've designed together." After the Whitmores departed, life in Copper Falls settled into new rhythms. Hartley's influence waned as stories of his past circulated and businesses began finding alternatives to his monopolistic practices. The fires stopped. The threatening letters ceased. Clara's work at Maggie's shop flourished. Her Eastern training combined with practical frontier needs created a unique style that drew customers from neighboring towns. She began taking special commissions, including a wedding dress for the school teacher and new curtains for the church. Tom's forge prospered too. The confrontation with Hartley had actually improved his reputation. People respected a man who stood by his principles. He hired young Timothy Walker as an apprentice, teaching the boy not just blacksmithing, but the quiet dignity Sam Morrison had once taught him. On a crisp Sunday morning in early December, Reverend Mills announced from the pulpit that Tom Morrison and Clara Bennett intended to wed. The congregation's response was warm, with only a few holdouts maintaining disapproving silence. Hartley's pew sat conspicuously empty. He'd left for Denver the previous week, his business empire crumbling. The wedding was set for Christmas Eve. Clara worked on her dress in secret, while Tom crafted something mysterious in the forge during evening hours. The whole town seemed invested in the celebration, as if their union represented triumph over prejudice and narrow-mindedness. A week before the wedding, Clara was closing the shop when she heard rapid hoofbeats. Through the window, she saw a lone rider galloping hard toward town. As he grew closer, she recognized one of the miners from Crawford's operation. "Fire!" he shouted as he thundered past. "Fire at the mine! Cave in! Men trapped!" The town mobilized instantly. Men grabbed, tools and medical supplies streaming toward the mine. Clara joined the women gathering blankets and bandages, but her thoughts were with Tom. She knew he'd go. His strength and expertise with metal would be needed. The vigil lasted through the night. Women kept coffee brewing, children huddled near their mothers, everyone waiting for news. Dawn was breaking when the first rescued miners emerged, supported by exhausted rescuers. Clara's heart lifted when she saw Tom among them, grimy but whole. But the celebration was muted. 3 men remained trapped, the shaft too unstable for normal rescue attempts. The mine engineer shook his head grimly. "Need to shore it up, but that'll take time we don't have." Tom stepped forward. "I can do it. Fabricate supports on site, work fast, done similar in Pittsburgh." "It's suicide," Crawford protested. "One wrong move and the whole thing comes down." "Then I won't make wrong moves." Tom's jaw was set in lines Clara recognized. He'd made his decision. Terror and pride warred in Clara's chest as she watched him gather tools. She wanted to beg him not to go, but she understood this was who he was, someone who helped regardless of cost. "Be careful," was all she managed, her voice thick with fear. He touched her face gently. "Always am. Wait for me." The next hours were agony. Men came and went from the mine entrance, faces increasingly grim. Occasional rumbles spoke of shifting rock, each one sending fresh fear through the watchers. Clara found herself praying wordlessly, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. Finally, miraculously, shouts erupted from the mine. Men emerged, supporting the trapped miners, all alive if battered. Last came Tom, swaying with exhaustion, his shirt torn and bloodied from flying rock. Clara flew to him, not caring who saw. His arms closed around her, solid and real and alive. Around them, the crowd cheered for the rescue, for courage, for love proven under pressure. "Thought I might lose you," Clara whispered against his chest. "Takes more than a mountain to keep me from you," he replied, voice rough with fatigue and emotion. "We have a wedding to get to." Christmas Eve arrived with perfect mountain clarity, snow dusting the pines like sugar. The church filled early, decorated with evergreen boughs and candles that cast warm light on expectant faces. Clara stood in Maggie's shop, putting final touches on her appearance. The dress was simple but elegant, cream wool with delicate embroidery. She'd worked herself. She wore her hair up, secured with pins Tom had crafted, roses wrought in silver, so realistic they seemed to bloom against the dark coils. Her scars were visible, but she no longer minded. They were part of her story, the path that led her here. Maggie fussed with the veil, tears suspiciously bright in her eyes. "Never thought I'd go soft at weddings," she muttered. "You've changed this town, girl, changed all of us." The ceremony itself passed in a blur of promises and prayers. Clara remembered Tom's face as she walked down the aisle. The wonder in his eyes, the smile that transformed his usually serious features. She remembered their voices, blending in vows, the cool touch of the ring he'd made himself, the kiss that sealed their union while the congregation erupted in celebration. The reception filled the church hall with music and laughter. Tables groaned under potluck contributions. The miners' wives had outdone themselves with cooking. The ranchers donated beef, and someone had brought out a fiddle to set toes tapping. As Clara danced with her new husband, she marveled at the journey that brought her here. From rejection and despair to acceptance and joy, from isolation to community, from fear to love. "Happy?" Tom asked, spinning her carefully. Beyond words, she looked around the room at faces now familiar and dear. "I came west, thinking I was running toward a fantasy. Instead, I ran straight into real life. Messy, challenging, wonderful real life. Regrets? Only that it took so long to find you. Later, as they prepared to leave for their wedding night at the small cabin Tom had prepared in the mountains, Hartley's former clerk approached hesitantly. The young man had stayed when his employer fled, finding work with the Richardsons. "I wanted to say," he began awkwardly, "I'm sorry. For my part in things, you deserved better." Clara smiled, feeling magnanimous in her happiness. "We all deserve better than prejudice and fear. Thank you for saying so." As their wagon rolled out of town, wedding guests cheering and throwing rice, Clara looked back at Copper Falls. Lamplight glowed in windows, smoke rose from chimneys, life continued its eternal rhythm. But something had changed in this small mountain community. Hearts had opened, minds had expanded, courage had triumphed over convention. Tom's arm tightened around her. No looking back, only forward now. Clara leaned into his warmth, watching. Stars emerge in the darkening sky, forward together, whatever comes. The mountains stood eternal around them, witnesses to transformation and testament to endurance. The winter that followed Clara and Tom's wedding was the harshest in memory. Snow piled high against the buildings of Copper Falls and the mountain. Passes closed for weeks at a time, but inside the Morrison forge and home, warmth prevailed. Clara had moved her belongings from the small room above the workshop into the main house, transforming the Spartan bachelor quarters into a true home. She continued working at Maggie's shop, but now with a new purpose. The older woman had begun talking of retirement, hinting that she'd need someone to take over the business. Clara threw herself into learning not just the craft, but the business side, ordering supplies, managing accounts, building relationships with suppliers in Denver and beyond. Tom's forge rang with increased activity. The mine rescue had elevated his reputation throughout the region, and orders came from as far as Helena. Young Timothy Walker proved an eager apprentice, his quick mind grasping not just the physical techniques, but the artistry Tom tried to instill. "Metal has memory," Tom explained one afternoon as Clara brought lunch to the forge. Timothy listened with rapt attention, while Tom demonstrated a particularly complex joint. "Treat it wrong, and it'll fail when you need it most. Respect its nature, work with its grain, and it'll serve for generations." Clara smiled, recognizing the philosophy that extended far beyond blacksmithing. It was how Tom approached everything, with patience, respect, and understanding of essential nature. It was how he'd approached her, seeing past surface damage, to the strength beneath. 3 months into their marriage, Clara noticed changes in her body. The familiar nausea, the heightened sensitivity to smells, the bone-deep fatigue that struck without warning. When Doc Whitfield confirmed her suspicions, she sat in stunned silence for several minutes. "A baby," she finally whispered. "But I thought, with my illness." The elderly doctor smiled kindly. "Scarlet fever affects many things, but rarely fertility. You're healthy, Mrs. Morrison. There's no reason you can't have a dozen children if you want." Clara walked home in a daze, her hand pressed protectively over her still flat belly. The news felt miraculous and terrifying in equal measure. How would Tom react? They'd never discussed children specifically, though she'd seen his gentleness. With the town's youngsters, she found him at the forge, as always. He looked up as she entered, immediately sensing her mood. "What is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Not a ghost," Clara said slowly. "A future. Tom, we're going to have a baby." The hammer slipped from his hands, clanging on the stone floor. His face cycled through surprise, disbelief, and finally a joy so pure it took her breath away. In 2 strides he crossed to her, gathering her carefully in his arms. "A baby," he repeated wonderingly. "Our baby. Are you well? Do you need to rest?" "Should I Clara laughed, tension dissolving. I'm fine, we're fine. Doc says I'm healthy as a horse. Tom's hands framed her face, thumbs tracing the familiar scars with infinite tenderness. You've given me everything, he said, voice thick, with emotion. A home, a partner, hope I thought I'd lost. And now this. The news spread through Copper Falls with typical small-town efficiency. By evening, congratulations poured in. Maggie arrived with armloads of fabric for baby clothes. The miners' wives began planning a quilting bee, and Reverend Mills offered special prayers of thanksgiving at Sunday service. But not everyone celebrated. A week after the announcement, Clara was alone in the shop when the door chimed. She looked up from her sewing to find William Hartley standing in the doorway. He'd aged in the months since his disgrace, his once florid face now gaunt, his expensive clothes showing wear, but his eyes still held that dangerous mix of arrogance and resentment. Heard you're breeding, he said without preamble, the crude term making Clara flinch. Thought you should know what you're in for. Clara's hand moved instinctively to her belly. You're not welcome here, Mr. Hartley. Please leave. He ignored her, moving closer. You think those scars are bad? Wait until you see what you passed to your child. The sins of the parents, marked on innocent flesh. I've seen it happen. The cruelty of his words hit like physical blows. Clara's deepest fear, voiced by the man who'd tormented her. What if the baby inherited her disfigurement? Or worse? Get out, she managed, voice shaking. Get out before I call for help. Hartley's smile was vicious. Call whoever you want. I'm leaving town anyway. But think about what I said. Think about the curse you're passing on. He left, but his poison remained. Clara sat trembling in the empty shop, previous joy curdled into dread. When Maggie returned from errands, she found Clara in tears. What's happened? The older woman demanded, immediately shifting into protective mode. Clara told her, watching Maggie's face darken with fury. That bastard, how dare he? What if he's right? Clara interrupted. What if I pass this condition to our child? What if... Stop! Maggie's voice cut through the spiral of fear. You listen to me, Clara Morrison. That man knows nothing about medicine, nothing about love, and nothing about you. He's trying to steal your happiness because he has none of his own. She gripped Clara's shoulders firmly. Your baby will be perfect, marked or unmarked, because it will be loved, wanted, cherished. That's what matters. That's what makes a child blessed. Tom's reaction when Clara told him that evening was volcanic. She hadn't seen him truly angry before, and it was frightening. The careful control stripped away, revealing molten fury beneath. I'll kill him, he said flatly, already reaching for his coat. He comes near you again, threatens our child. No. Clara caught his arm. That's what he wants, to provoke you into something that destroys our life here. Don't give him that power. The struggle on Tom's face was visible, rage warring with reason. Finally, he pulled her close, his voice muffled against her hair. If he's hurt you, scared you about the baby... I am scared, Clara admitted, but not because of his words, because I want this child so much, and I'm terrified of failing it somehow. Tom drew back to look at her. You could never fail our child. Any baby lucky enough to have you for a mother is already blessed beyond measure. As her pregnancy progressed, the town rallied around Clara in ways that continued to surprise her. Women who'd barely acknowledged her before now stopped to share advice, remedies, and encouragement. The fear Hartley had planted didn't disappear entirely, but it was overwhelmed by community support and Tom's unwavering devotion. He crafted a cradle with the same meticulous care he brought to commissioned work, every joint perfect, every surface smooth as silk. The design incorporated roses like those on Clara's wedding pins, carved so delicately they seemed to bloom from the wood itself. It's beautiful, Clara breathed when he unveiled it. Too beautiful for everyday use. Nothing's too beautiful for our child, Tom replied, running his scarred hands over the polished rails. Besides, things made with love last longer. Sam, Morrison taught me that. The first pains came during a spring thunderstorm, 2 weeks before Doc Whitfield's estimated date. Tom was at the forge when Timothy came running, splashing through puddles, shouting incoherently about Mrs. Clara and the baby. What followed were the longest hours of Tom's life. He paced outside the bedroom while Doc Whitfield and Maggie attended Clara, her cries of pain tearing at him worse than any physical wound. The storm raged overhead, matching his internal turmoil. "First babies take time," the doctor assured him during a brief break. "Everything's progressing normally." Normal? Tom wanted to laugh. Nothing about this felt normal. The woman he loved in agony, their child fighting its way into the world, his own helplessness in the face of nature's demands. Finally, as dawn light filtered through rain-washed windows, a new cry split the air. Tom froze, hardly daring to breathe. The door opened and Maggie beckoned him inside. Clara lay propped against pillows, exhausted but radiant. In her arms nestled a tiny bundle from which emerged the most perfect sounds Tom had ever heard, the indignant wails of their newborn child. "A daughter," Clara whispered, pulling back the blanket to reveal a small, perfect face. "Tom, we have a daughter." He approached slowly as if in a dream. The baby's skin was unmarked, pink and healthy, with wisps of dark hair like her mother's. But it wouldn't have mattered if she'd borne 100 scars. She was theirs, created from their love, living proof that beauty could emerge from any beginning. "She's perfect," he breathed, touching one tiny fist with a trembling finger. The baby grasped it immediately, her grip surprisingly strong. "What shall we call her?" Clara smiled, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Hope, Hope Elizabeth Morrison, because that's what she represents." The town celebrated Hope's arrival with enthusiasm that surprised even long-time residents. Gifts appeared daily on the Morrison doorstep. Hand-knitted blankets, carved toys, preserves for the new parents. The christening drew such a crowd that people stood outside the church, straining to hear Reverend Mills welcome the newest member of their community. As spring deepened into summer, life settled into new patterns. Clara returned to work part-time, bringing Hope with her in a basket Tom had reinforced with metal strips for safety. Customers cooed over the baby, and more than one commented on how the shop felt more welcoming with new life present. "Been thinking," Maggie said one afternoon, watching Clara skillfully manage both baby and hemming. "Time I made things official. The shop should be yours." Clara's needle paused. "Maggie, I couldn't." "Course you could. You've got the skill, the business sense, and now the roots. I'm not getting younger, and I'd rather see the place in good hands than watch it decline." She smiled, a rare softness in her weathered face. "Consider it my gift to Hope. Every child should inherit something from their elders." The transfer was arranged with minimal fuss, Maggie retaining a small percentage, and the right to work when she pleased. Clara threw herself into plans for expansion, ideas she'd harbored now possible. The shop would carry not just practical clothes, but finer goods too, as Copper Falls grew and prospered. Tom supported her ambitions with quiet pride, watching her confidence bloom. Marriage and motherhood hadn't diminished her drive, but channeled it into new directions. He often paused in his work to observe her through the window connecting forge to house, nursing Hope while reviewing orders, teaching Timothy's sister basic stitches, consulting with customers about designs. The only shadow on their happiness was news that filtered in from other towns. Hartley had indeed left the territory, but stories followed him like smoke. Failed business ventures, accusations of fraud, increasingly desperate schemes to regain his former status. Part of Clara pitied him, this man so consumed by pride, he'd destroyed every chance at genuine connection. He brought it on himself. Tom said when she expressed these thoughts. Some folks can't bear to see others happy. They'd rather tear down than build up. A year passed, marked by Hope's first tooth, first steps, first words. She toddled between forge and shop, equally at home with hot metal and fine fabric, watched over by an entire town that had adopted her as their collective grandchild. Clara's business thrived. She hired 2 assistants and began taking commissions from as far as San Francisco. Her designs caught the attention of a fashion magazine correspondent passing through, resulting in an article that brought inquiries from across the country. "My wife, the famous dressmaker," Tom teased one evening, reading the magazine piece aloud. "Says here you're bringing Eastern sophistication to frontier practicality. Should I start charging admission to the forge?" Clara laughed, plucking the magazine from his hands. "Fame is fleeting, family is forever." She settled beside him on the porch swing, Hope drowsing in her lap. "Besides, you're the true artist. I just follow patterns you create from raw materials." "We both create," Tom corrected, his arm around her shoulders, "just different mediums. And speaking of creating..." He paused, sudden shyness overtaking him. Hope might like a brother or sister. Clara turned to study his face, seeing the careful Hope there. "She might," she agreed softly, "and her parents might like another miracle." As if in response, Hope stirred, babbling sleepily. Her parents smiled at each other over her head, understanding passing wordlessly between them. Their family would grow. Their roots in Copper Falls would deepen. Their shared life would continue to unfold in ways neither had dared imagine during those first uncertain days. The second pregnancy was confirmed just as autumn painted the mountains gold. This time, Clara felt only joy at the news. Hartley's cruel predictions long since proven false. The town's excitement matched their own, with friendly wagers on gender and arrival date. Winter arrived early again, but the Morrison household was prepared. The forge rang with activity as Tom worked on commissioned pieces and special projects. Clara managed the shop from home during the heaviest snow, her assistants handling day-to-day operations. Hope, now walking confidently and chattering in 2-word sentences, appointed herself Mama's helper. She brought Clara water, mostly spilled, patted her growing belly with sticky hands, and announced to anyone who'd listen that baby coming. The birth, when it came, was easier than the first. Clara recognized the signs. Tom fetched the doctor with less panic, and by evening they welcomed Samuel Thomas Morrison into the world, named for the man who'd given Tom his second chance. "A son," Tom whispered, cradling the infant with hands that could bend iron but held new life with impossible gentleness. Sam would have been proud. "He would," Clara agreed, watching Hope peek curiously at her new brother. "Of all of it. The life you've built, the family you've created, the way you've honored his legacy." Their family complete, the Morrisons, settled into the rhythms of small-town life. The business thrived, the forge prospered, and their children grew strong and confident. Hope showed early artistic talent, spending hours drawing patterns that Clara incorporated into designs. Sam inherited his father's affinity for metal, toddling after Tom in the forge with toy hammers and serious concentration. 5 years after, Clara stepped off that fateful train. Copper Falls had transformed. The mine still anchored the economy, but other businesses flourished. The population had doubled, drawing families seeking the kind of community where differences were accepted and second chances honored. Clara stood in her expanded shop, watching Hope help a customer choose buttons while Sam napped in the back room. Through the window, she could see Tom teaching Timothy advanced techniques at the forge. The young man had grown into a skilled craftsman, ready to start his own shop in a neighboring town. The bell above the door chimed, and Clara looked up to see an unexpected visitor. Elizabeth Whitmore, Now Elizabeth Bradley entered with a smile that transformed her scarred face into something beautiful. "Clara, I hoped I'd find you here." Elizabeth embraced her warmly. "Father's in town on business, and I insisted on coming along. I had to see you to thank you again." "There's nothing to thank me for," Clara protested, but Elizabeth shook her head. "Everything. You showed me how to live with these." She gestured to her scars without self-consciousness. "I'm married now. Robert's a teacher, doesn't care a whit about appearances. We're expecting our first child." The two women talked for hours, sharing stories of marriage, motherhood, and lives rebuilt from ashes of despair. When Elizabeth left, promising to return soon, Clara felt a deep satisfaction. She'd played a small part in another woman's healing, paying forward the kindness she'd received. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Tom proposed a toast. "To 5 years," he said, raising his glass. "To the bravest woman I know, who crossed a continent on hope and taught an entire town about true beauty." Clara blushed but raised her own glass. "To the man who saw past scars, to the person beneath, who gave me shelter and never asked for anything in return." "Mama pretty," Hope contributed, lifting her cup of milk. "Dada strong," Sam added, not to be outdone. They laughed, the sound filling their home with warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing Copper Falls in pristine white. But inside the Morrison house, life blazed bright with love, acceptance, and the miracle of second chances. Later, after the children were asleep and the house had quieted, Clara and Tom sat together by the fire. She leaned against his shoulder, watching flames dance behind the grate, thinking about the journey that had brought them here. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Hartley had accepted me?" she mused. "If I'd married him as planned." Tom's arm tightened around her. "Sometimes. And then I thank God he showed his true nature. His cruelty was the greatest gift he could have given us." Clara nodded, understanding perfectly. "I was so frightened that day, so certain my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning." "Fear tells us we're facing something important," Tom replied. "You taught me that. Sometimes the scariest path leads to the greatest joy." They sat in comfortable silence, the culmination of years of shared struggle and triumph. In the forge, next door, banked coals glowed faintly, ready to spring to life come morning. In the shop, fabric waited to become garments that would clothe bodies and lift spirits. In the rooms above, two children slept peacefully, secure in their parents' love. And in the heart of Copper Falls, a scarred blacksmith and his marked bride had found what they'd never dared dream of. Not just acceptance or survival, but abundant life. Their scars remained, permanent reminders of past pain, but now they wore them like badges of honor, proof that true beauty lay not in perfection, but in the courage to be seen, to love, and to hope. The mountains stood eternal witness to their story, and the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, yet somehow blessing those who persevered. In their light, all scars faded to insignificance, leaving only the essential truth. Love transforms everything it touches, making beautiful what the world calls broken. As Clara drifted towards sleep, still held safe in Tom's arms, she thought about the mail-order bride who'd stepped off that train so long ago, desperate, frightened, certain she was unworthy of love. That woman seemed like a stranger now, replaced by someone stronger, surer, surrounded by blessings she'd never imagined possible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new moments of joy and sorrow. But whatever came, she would face it with confidence, supported by the love of a good man, the laughter of healthy children, and the embrace of a community that had learned to see beyond surfaces to the gold beneath. Her scars would always be part of her story, but they no longer defined her destiny. That belonged to love, the force that had brought a burned blacksmith and a marked bride together, healing them both and creating something beautiful from their shared brokenness. In the end, perhaps that was the greatest miracle of all. Up. Next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.